I want to begin by thanking the Sherry family for generously supporting this annual visit by a major American poet. And this is a special occasion because it's our first time collaborating with the Department of Visual Arts, who have really helped to make this a really rich event, a series of events. So thank you to Jessica Stockholder in Dova and Zach Cahill at the Open Practice Committee. And thank you to the Creative Writing Program and the English Department as well. The best poems ride along the edge of a relation where consciousness forms, opening the subject into the myriad predicates that constitute it, writes Anne Lauterbach in her marvelous essay, The Given and the Chosen. What Lauterbach says of poems here is equally true of the best critical thought that, like her own meditations on art, philosophy, and poetry, ride along the edge of relation. Whether she's writing on poets from Walt Whitman to Barbara Guest, on painters like Gerhard Richter or John Curran, or on philosophers ranging from Giorgio Agamben to Ralph Waldo Emerson, her beloved Ralph Waldo Emerson, Lauterbach's prose is a continuation of her poetry by other means. We see this in the boldly digressive architectures of a serial essay like The Night Sky, or in the lineated trajectories of her talk, As It Is, toward a poetics of the whole fragment. We see this in the way she looks poetically at sculpture and painting, a perspective that has influenced the work of promising young artists at the Yale School of Art, at her home institution, Bard, and now here at the University of Chicago. Most importantly, though, we see it in the syntax of her thinking itself, a kind of generative grammar that continuously ramifies in unexpected directions to reconfigure our ways of imagining what can be made from what is chosen. And here's a quote from the essay. I like the idea that certain givens or inheritances which cannot be factually altered can be reconfigured, sometimes beyond all recognition. This reconfiguration does not abandon the initial individuated reality, but alters its internal shape, its syntax, if you will, to allow new possibilities. The fact of the reconfiguration provides an opening through which what already exists finds itself in what does not yet exist. This opening is an invitation. As a poet and theorist, Lauterbach's respect for the given does not preclude her reconfiguring the stubborn materials of reality into astonishing new shapes, just as a speaker, in uttering a sentence, opens her subject into the myriad predicates that constitute it, or the way that a sculptor, shaping her metal, clay, or stone, discovers new forms of expression within these media. The very titles of Lauterbach's books, Many Times But Then, for example, or And, for example, or To Begin Again, illustrate how the parts of speech themselves carry the possibilities of reconfiguring our relations to the world around us. Lauterbach's work shows us new ways of thinking not only about visual syntax, but the grammar of feeling as well, and the ways that we, as subjects, open, again and again, into the myriad predicates that constitute us. Anne Lauterbach is the author of several poetry collections, including most recently Or to Begin Again, which was a finalist for the National Book Award. She is also the author of Hum, If in Time, Selected Poems, 1975 to 2000, On a Stair, and, for example, Clamor, Before Recollection, and Many Times But Then, as well as a book of essays, The Night Sky, Writings on the Poetics of Experience. She's the recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the New York State Foundation for the Arts, the Ingram Merrill Foundation, and in 1995, she was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship. Lauterbach has taught at Brooklyn College, Columbia University, the Iowa Writers Workshop, Princeton University, and at the City College of New York and the CUNY Graduate Center. She is currently Schwab Professor of Languages and Literature at Bard College, where she has also been, since 1991, co-chair of writing in the Milton Avery School of the Arts. She served as a visiting core critic at the Yale Graduate School of the Arts as well. Please join me in welcoming Anne Lauterbach.
I'm really glad to be here. I love this city. I love the Midwest. Even though I grew up in the East Coast, I went to the University of Wisconsin and learned that the Midwest was a very fine place to be, and never stopped thinking that. Spent a winter in Minneapolis, and Chicago has always been obviously the center of an extraordinary culture. And I could go on about that, but I guess I won't. I'll try and get to this other thing. So I am actually going to read this very essay that I was invited by David Levi Strauss, who's a art critic and marvelous, thoughtful person who began his life indeed as a poet in California, studied with Robert Duncan. I've known him for many years, and he's now the head of critical writing at the School of Visual Arts. And he has a lecture series that he does that is actually on 23rd Street in an auditorium. And when I gave this the first time, I grew up on 18th Street, so this is only a few blocks from where I grew up. And I feel like my glasses are crooked. Her glasses are crooked. So there's a what do you call it? Like in a cinema, you know, there's a what are they called? A marquee, and there my name was in huge red lights, moving across. Anne Lauterbach, the given and the chosen. I thought I can just die and go to heaven now. All right, so it has so that was one iteration, and then I gave it again at Yale and for the students there and for the MFA program. And I feel a little embarrassed to be reading you something that I've already done, but actually it's the kind of writing that it seems to me that even though it started in a particular moment, I'm interested in the relation between that moment in which something is made and the various iterations in time that might happen. Not that I'm going to go on reading it forever, but so it has two epigrams, epigrams. Which is it? Graphs. Always epigram is that other thing, right? The first one's from John Dewey. Art is experience. The abiding struggle of art is then to convert materials that are stammering and dumb in ordinary experience into eloquent media. And the next one is from Michael Palmer. The eye on each wing, for example, many have mentioned this, that it sees nothing, no one has mentioned this. And that's in reference to moths. He wrote a whole book called Company of Moths. And then there's a very famous other poem called The Moth Poem by Robin Blazer. Anyway, this is a photograph that I took of a moth that landed on the side of my house. So, and when I had this published, I may never get to this lecture, you know that. When it was published by Omnidawn, I sent out these pictures, and the marvelous Rusty Morrison, who runs Omnidawn, said, "Why the moth?" And I said, "Why not?" It's not what I said, but it's good enough. Okay. The given and the chosen. A few days ago, it's not true anymore. A few days ago, I was having dinner with a friend, the novelist Paul Lafarge, and he asked, What is this talk you are giving at SVA about? The description is mysterious. Maybe he said unclear. Maybe he said ambiguous. Ah, I thought that again. The about. It's an old question, the subject of the subject. People ask when I tell them I am a poet, what are your poems about? It is a question I can almost never answer. The poems find their subjects as they are made. I do not want to suggest that there is no there, no outside. On the contrary, the world, its objects and events press towards the poems, competing for a place, and I have to try to make sufficient room for this crowd, this variousness. But the world as such cannot be in the poem. Only language can be in the poem. Language is the poem's material given. I might then say in answer to the question, what are your poems about? What is this talk about? That they are about what might arise between the given and the chosen. There's a note on this. I think that the art and writing I most care about thickens and eludes, blurs and enriches my sense of the subject, so that who I am and what it is engage in a fluid exchange. This is not a mystical experience. One does not depart into some other realm. It is instead an intensification of the awareness of consciousness itself. The mediate space between Freud's pleasure principle and the death drive, eros and thanatos, is this third term, the will to make something from something, poiesis. Eros moves us toward the other, desiring, and thanatos pushes back with the limit, the end. Between the two, forms occur. My sense of pleasure, both as a writer and as a viewer or reader, derives in part from feeling at the indeterminate threshold, the shift between the given and the chosen. Wallace Stevens notes toward a supreme fiction. He had to choose, but it was not a choice between excluding things. It was not a choice between, but of. He chose to include the things that in each other are included, the whole, the complicate, the amassing harmony. The given and the chosen, the gift and the choice, the prior and the yet to come. The two terms do not form a proper binary. They do not glare at each other over an abyss of opposition or negation, but rather slide toward and away from each other like sunlight on a wire. They seem to carry spiritual or even religious overtones with phrases like the gift of life and the chosen people hovering uneasily over our secular heads. There is an unnerving temporal ambiguity between the fact of the given and the incipience of the gift, between the apprehension of more than one and the preferential limiting moment of choice. Etymologically, choice gathers to itself taste and wish and favor, enjoyment, desire, love, and pleasure. Gift, on the other hand, brings with it payment, specifically for a wife, and poison. But those of you who are familiar with the work of Marcel Mauss or Lewis Hyde know that the concept of the gift is both ancient and vexed, touching at the very quick of our notions of reciprocity and exchange, as well as our sense of what is innate. The child, we say, is gifted. You all doing okay so far? Good. I live now in the country and am increasingly conscious of the dispositions of choice in relation to time, the temporal economy of being. Many of us, persons whose lives are reasonably successful and who have a fairly normal complement of responsibilities, seem to live perpetually close to a kind of temporal anarchy. Days are spent in stressed imbalances between needs and desires, preparations and accomplishments, the wish for solitude and the wish to participate. Expectation and result, effort and efficacy, reception and response, these permutating causalities feel attenuated, torn. It is as if we were suspended like atomic particles in a hectic medium, each unable to either come to rest or to find our way to the solace of molecular attachments. Our hope that the heart and mind will work in concert and that this heart-mind will be embodied in our actions and responses seems as near as a walk on the beach in February. But for our time, perhaps Michel Foucault came closest to diagnosing the causes of anguish for the modern Western subject. Deleuze, speaking of Foucault, remarks, finally, in his last books, there's the discovery of thought as establishing ways of existing, or, as Nietzsche put it, inventing new possibilities of life, existing not as a subject, but as a work of art. And this last phase presents thought as artistry. I love this idea. Many years ago, it might have been 1973 or 1974, before almost anybody in this room was born, I gave a course at St. Martin's School of Art in London called Choice, Decision, and Judgment. I was interested then, as I am then. I had no business teaching this course, by the way, absolutely none. But I wrote them and said, I have this idea. And they wrote back and said, sure, you go ahead, fine. Many years ago, it might have been 1973 or 1974, I was 10. It was amazing. I gave a course at St. Martin's School of Art in London called Choice, Decision, and Judgment. I was interested then, as I am now, in asking questions about the possible relation between forms of life and forms of art. At the time, I was concerned with individuals, persons, identities. I wanted to know if the sequence of choice, decision, and judgment in one's quotidian life might have some bearing on that same sequence, choice, decision, judgment, in making art. Was there some innate tendency or even habit in both domains that could be discerned so that a work of art somehow captured the essence of a person? Contrarily, could the process of making choices, decisions, and judgments in art making in fact condition and shape a person's life? Perhaps unsurprisingly, the figure that came closest to resolving this conundrum for me was John Cage. In Cage, there seemed to be a continuum between the given and the chosen, so closely calibrated as to be indistinguishable, seamless. One sensed in Cage an active receptivity that reconfigured desire, that one sensed in Cage an active receptivity that reconfigured desire into a form of waiting or listening, that reset choice into operations of chance. Somehow, Cage had found a way to convert life into art and art into life. This seemed to me an emblem of personal contentment that might extend into the world as an ethical proposal. I grew up in Lower Manhattan, the child of urban, enlightened, secular, progressive, left, idealist, steeped in utopian visions of the possibility of making a better world. One of them, my father, would die of polio when he was 36, and the other, my mother, would become an alcoholic and abandon her children, dying at 53. Perhaps it is the dissonance between these initial sets that made me curious in the first place to think about the relation between the given and the chosen. I find myself aware of a residuum that settles down below fluctual reality, beneath all attempts to change or reconfigure the facts and their consequences into fresh potentials. This residuum is like a flavor, a stain or a scent, in the sense that these things can stay behind after the agent has left. What is the nature of this residuum in terms of subjective experience? In my case, it is a combination of precariousness and loss as initial given tropes of existence. These feelings govern the various ameliorations of a somewhat productive life. They cannot be dislodged. But neither need they orchestrate the animate attachments to the actual that beckon, engage, and enhance the days. The self, I want to believe, is layered and aspectual. It can shift and turn and connect variously to various stimuli. It has agility at its core, a mechanism of survival and response which can be freed from ingrained habit. Habits are economical for sure, but they cost us in fluidity, openness, quickness. How then do we integrate our sense of self with our will to change? Sitting in my living room with my friend and former student, poet and translator, Stacey Doris. Stacey Doris, one of the most remarkable women who died last January. We are having an easy conversation which comes into focus when she comments that we all have an inheritance. When she came to visit me, she was already sick. She had cancer, and she'd come especially to see me. This was about a year before she actually died. Sitting in my living room with my friend and former student, poet and translator, Stacey Doris, we are having an easy conversation which comes into focus when she comments that we all have an inheritance, language, family, culture, generation, but what we do with it is to take this responsibility and reconfigure it. These words, responsibility and reconfigure, are precise in relation to my concerns about subjectivity and art making. I like the idea that certain givens or inheritances, which cannot be factually altered, can be reconfigured, sometimes beyond all recognition. This reconfiguration does not abandon the initial individuated reality, but alters its internal shape, its syntax, if you will, to allow new possibilities. The fact of the reconfiguration provides an opening through which what already exists finds itself in what does not yet exist. This opening is an invitation. By now, it must be clear to you that I am disinclined to the force of linear argument, wary of the discretions of causal logic. Not surprisingly, I am also fearful of authority and certitude. I like to assemble pieces, fragments, stuff. I like to digress and wander and scan in the hopes of making an arrangement of suggestive, provisional affiliations. The idea is to leave enough room for others, for other subjectivities, to engage and explore as if they were guests. We do not ask guests to strip themselves of their stuff when they come to our dwellings, at least not yet. We are hoping to provide a place for animated conversation in which gaps and silences, shifts in tone, curiosity, and inquiry might be accommodated, in which our interpretations and responses are safe. Hospitality opens out toward the circulations of the commons, the public social space now all but lost in the slippages of scroll and screen and cell. So that's the first arc of this talk. I think there are 3 arcs. This second arc is somewhat polemical, but is not meant as a polemics. I just want to tell you that ahead of time. Does anybody want to get up and walk around before I start the second act? You're okay? Okay. Is it already a given, a truism, a cliche of the contemporary, that the artificial tissue of access provided by the internet has made us feel less connected, more abstract, and estranged from each other and from the world? Is it also already a truism that to question or resist this new habitat is either reactionary or futile or both? Cassandra is waiting in the wings. Some notes hastily scribbled while watching the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer on PBS the 4th of January, 2010. 3 technology experts have been asked to assess the next decade. Part of the conversation, harder to consume, everyone is a creator, throwaway, libertarian paternalism, people want to be led, a tool, not an obligation, media shift, we're all watching each other, vaster wasteland, shake in rather than shake out, not enough jobs, fading industry, frivolous, for free, not institutions but individuals with things to do, arrival of sensors, observe and manipulate, robot revolution, Avatar. In 1908, the German sociologist Georg Simmel wrote about the abiding question of the difference between nature and culture. Culture, he wrote, exists only if man draws into his development something that is external to him. Cultivation is certainly a state of the soul, but one that is reached only by means of the use of purposely created objects. But for Simmel, the technological objects of modernity, artifacts of human imagination and ingenuity, were becoming increasingly autonomous, controlled, as he put it, by an internal logic tied to their instrumentality, unable to be absorbed to add to cultural experience. This is a really extraordinary perception, right? This is very, very early, 1908. And he's saying, okay, but this thing that we're doing now seems to be not something that's going to make this cultural idea happen. It's alien from this possibility of absorption. As the futurists embraced the iconic turbines of a mechanized utopia, as Malevich and Kandinsky explored the ravishing geometries of an abstract visionary landscape, the instrumental logic of brute indifference was also being born. Modernity, nothing if not enraptured by the rabid calculations of the new, seems to have barely noticed that the new, by its very nature, would consume and be consumed. I did not catch the names of the 3 techno-gurus on the NewsHour, but not long afterwards I saw a review of the book in the Times, and the author's photo was of one of them, Jaron Lanier. Lanier's book is called You Are Not a Gadget, a Manifesto. Lanier, who was born in 1960 and was an early participant in the dot-com revolution, credited with the formulation virtual reality, sets out a series of fragmentary perceptions and comments from, as it were, inside the game. He speaks about cybernetic totalism. He says information is alienated experience. He says that the ideology of the digital world has failed both spiritually and behaviorally. The spiritual failure denies what he calls the mystery of the existence of experience. The behavioral failure involves what he calls the ubiquitous invocations of anonymity and crowd identity. The behavioral failure involves what he calls the ubiquitous invocations of anonymity and crowd identity. The utopian vision of a free and open culture that might turn toward economic benefits for many, if not all, has also failed. The middle class continues to dwindle, wealth continues to concentrate. If we can't formulate digital ideals before our appointment with destiny, he warns, we will have failed to bring about a better world. Instead, we will usher in a dark age in which everything human is devalued. Manifestos by nature are given to exaggeration and hyperbole, but Lanier stirs up free-floating anxiety. What we assume as given, our humanity, might be being taken away, eradicated, annulled before our very eyes. We have heard such alarms before. Ortega y Gasset in 1948 thought that abstraction was dehumanizing art. Television was seen as the death of familial conversation and literacy. It is hard to separate the message from the messenger. But the instrumental products of our culture, these gorgeous, sleek toys, do seem to turn everyone into objectified data, indifferent or immune to our status as persons with lives beyond Facebook communities, instant replays, or replies. How might we inhabit this other world, unrecorded and unobserved? Do we cease to exist when we are here in the actuality of a physical elsewhere? My young friend Andrew's message on his cell phone says, I am not here, but here has no location in real-time space. Increasingly, I am aware that what I have chosen to do or be in my life is of decreasing relevance to the ways in which we think the world. Poetry, particularly contemporary written poetry of an experimental bent, has been dropped from the considerations of nearly all media outlets and is rarely referred to in our conversations. It has, of course, found ample refuge in the promiscuous animations of the internet, in blogs and websites, both useful and influential, at least to poets and students of poetry. As Ubu webmeister Kenneth Goldsmith is said to have remarked, if it isn't on the internet, it doesn't exist. This is not an uninteresting statement connecting the neutral pronoun it to the idea of existence, or rather non-existence. We have heard this it before in the objectification of our soldiers, by our soldiers of their prisoners at Abu Ghraib. Persons can easily become its. Poems are structures that specifically resist the objectification of persons and the instrumentality of language. Many people think poems are little dressed-up narratives of self-reflection, expressivity, and catharsis, and indeed many of them are. In a world that offers an endless glut of glittery selves that rise and fall through the limitless ether like Milton's angels, it is not difficult to understand why poetry has become anathema in the public imagination. It neither fully informs nor fully entertains. The best poems ride along the edge of relation where consciousness forms, opening the subject into the myriad predicates that constitute it. As cultural theorists, contemporary poets, and philosophers have told us ad infinitum, the grammatical shifter I is not synonymous with a self, and a self cannot be either fully revealed or discovered in language. I once heard John Ashbery remark, I am John, Ashbery writes the poems. As we poets teeter on the verge of extinction, we might find comfort in the words of Giorgio Agamben, quote, those who are truly contemporary, who truly belong to their time, are those who neither perfectly coincide with it nor adjust themselves to its demands. They are thus, in this sense, irrelevant. George Oppen's great poem of Being Numerous from 1968 is, among other things, a meditation on the notion of the individual, the one. Oppen is exemplary for many of us, partly because he stopped writing poetry for 20 years in the face of an urgent politics which he did not think poetry should or could address. He was included in the group called the Objectivists and had no truck with the augmented expressivity commonly associated then as now with poetry. His abiding value was clarity. Clarity, as he wrote, in the sense of silence. I understand this form of silence, like that of John Cage, to be a trope for receptivity, for listening and waiting. Here are some lines from the poem. We are pressed on each other. We will be told at once of anything that happens, and the discovery of fact bursts in a paroxysm of emotion, now as always. Crusoe, we say, was rescued. So we have chosen, obsessed, bewildered by the shipwreck of the singular, we have chosen the meaning of being numerous. For often the urban crowd flowing through the city displaces the solitary, meditative man. The instant relay of events unleashes a paroxysm of emotion, and the mineral fact of the material world, accompanied by what he calls the intensity of seeing, contribute to the bright light of shipwreck. The urban did not hold for him the delectable anonymity of the flaneur, nor the insouciant serendipities that Frank OHara celebrates, nor the dystopic enclave of production of Warhol's factory. The upsurge of experimental freedoms of the 1960s appeared to Oppen as ominous. The poem, here breaking into prose, continues, or in that light, new arts, dithyrambic, audience as artists. But I will listen to a man, I will listen to a man, and when I speak, I will speak, though he will fail and I will fail. But I will listen to him speak. The shuffling of a crowd is nothing, well, nothing but the men that we are, but nothing. Urban art, art of the cities, art of the young in the cities. The isolated man is dead, his world around him exhausted, and he fails, that meditative man, and indeed, they cannot bear it. This poem, by the way, which was published in 68, won the 1969 Pulitzer Prize. Astoundingly. And indeed, we cannot bear it. Oppen anticipates the erosion of inwardness, not as self-absorption or narcissism, but as the receptivity necessary to thoughtfulness. He could not have known that thought would be consigned to opinion, or that the reclusive preference of brilliant eccentrics like J.D. Salinger. He could not have predicted that our thoughtful president would be vilified for lacking the aggressive temperament we have come to mistake for leadership. Oppen's image of the bright light of shipwreck conjures for me all the untoward suddenness of our times, bombs exploding, towers falling, earthquakes rupturing, the flash of annihilation that hovers just on the other side of our earthly existence and over which we have no say. For my generation, this hovering extinction was a given, felt as imminent threat from an implacable monolithic other, abstractly framed. It was an it, disassociated from persons. For this generation, the threat finds itself secreted, both intimate and diffuse, tucked inside cars and trucks and the undergarments of individuals whose care for this life, her life, his life, your life, my life, has been forfeited. This indifference to earthly life speaks into the absolute negative, where nothing is given in the here and now, and where the idea of choice presents itself as numbing obedience and renunciation. Our culture of getting and spending, in Wordsworth's famous phrase, offers no appeal. Our rhetoric of freedom falls on deaf ears. But for this, our present moment, images of an apocalyptic catastrophe seem overly theatrical. What threatens are far subtler forms of destruction inflicted from within. erosion, recalcitrance, redundancy, inertia, expedience, literalism, impatience, fraud, abuse. What threatens is a world of ostensible choice, staged as an infinite regress of mirrors, unmoored from either historical contingency or consequence, a world of viral proliferation without difference. It is as if modernity's signal value, the new, had reformulated itself as tractionless spin, where everyone is simultaneously present and absent in an eviscerated but engorged now, where nothing of actual consequence can happen. Anne Hamilton sent me a book called Radical Hope, Ethics in the Face of Cultural Devastation. The author, Jonathan Lear, who teaches here at the University of Chicago, considers the fate of the Crow Nation, specifically through the life of Plenty Coups. Coup? Is it coup? C-O-U-P-S? Plenty Coups. Their last great chief. Plenty Coups straddled the world between cultural vitality and cultural extinction, living to tell his story and the story of his people to a white interlocutor. Lear is struck by the fact that Plenty Coups refused to talk about anything after the Crow were confined to the reservation and the buffalo herd was eradicated. He said, "But when the buffalo went away, the hearts of my people fell to the ground, and they could not lift them up again. After this, nothing happened." After this, nothing happened. For the Crow, history did indeed come to an end. All that they had lived for and believed in had vanished. Lear wonders what it might mean to have the concepts, the givens, that make it possible to understand oneself go out of existence, concepts which inform, as he puts it, the intimate connection between thinking and being. He writes, "As it turns out, intending and hoping and wondering and desiring are not just up to me. They are not just a matter of exercising my will. And my ability to do so is not just a psychological issue. It is a question of the field in which psychological states are possible." The image of a field is, of course, iconic in the American imagination. It is probably not an accident that Lear evokes it here. The field extends into familiar tropes, weavings, meadows, waves, which inflect countless novels, photographs, films, poems, and paintings. The field informs our idealistic sense of the interplay between the one and the many, sameness and difference, our dream of mobility in the elastic lens between distant horizon and garden gate. Iterations and images of fields can be found in Whitman and Pollock, in Anne Hamilton and Agnes Martin, in Charles Olson and Robert Duncan, Maya Lin and James Schuyler. Schuyler wrote, "Past is past. I salute that various field." The image evokes the agrarian romance of the farm, the killing fields of war, the mute graves of the dead, and the vibrant play of games. It announces the distinctive limit of the chosen. We have, we say, a field of interest. The field reminds us of the particular attachment we have to place, how that attachment has informed the geography of the mind. The Crow lost their field of vision. What would it mean for their victorious enemy, ourselves, to lose ours? And who among us has the wisdom of Plenty Coups to know when nothing has happened? I have a collection, this is the third arc. I have a collection of small works, paintings and drawings and sculptures, most of them gifts from friends and students. Like my books, I think of these objects as providing mute but tangible company. The pleasure I take from them is derived not only from their surface charms, each of them has within it from their surface charms, each of them has within itself a temporal history of choices and decisions that is at once tacit and evident. My sense is that our love for certain artists and writers is bound up in our capacity to know or read this active field of engagement, of call and response, ways of distinguishing, turns of mind, indeed to experience or inhabit the very moments of choice. I am not referring here merely to stylistic revelations of suturing or gesture, but rather to a more subtle kind of immanent unraveling of the motions of composition. Works of art restructure the present, anchoring it to the ground of an embodied materiality that has within itself the history of its making. Gerhard Richter, Notes, 1990. Except that I can plan nothing. Any thoughts on my part about the construction of a picture are false, and if the execution works, this is only because I partly destroy it, or because it works in spite of everything, by not distracting and by not looking the way I had planned. I often find this intolerable and even impossible to accept because, as a thinking, planning human being, it humiliates me to find out that I am so powerless. It casts doubts on my competence and constructive ability. My only consolation is to tell myself that I did actually make the pictures, even though they are a law unto themselves, even though they treat me any way they like and sometimes just take shape, because it is still up to me to determine at what point they are finished. Picture making consists of a multitude of yes-no decisions with a yes to end it all. If I look at it that way, the whole thing starts to feel quite natural again, or rather nature-like, alive, and the same thing applies to the comparison on the social level. Photographer Jeff Wall in an interview. When I started to work with the computer, I had the idea that I could use the otherworldly special effects to develop a kind of philosophical comedy. This makes me think of Diderot, of the idea that a certain light shown on behavior, costume, and discourse creates an amusement which helps to detach you from the immediate surroundings and projects you into a field of reflection in which humanity appears as infinitely imperfectible. This imperfection implies gentleness and forgiveness, and the artistic challenge is to express that without sentimentality. Wall continues, I guess the key metaphor in these works is learning. We learn. We never complete the process of learning, and so learning is a kind of image of incompleteness and limitation, but a hopeful image as well. He says that in one of his works, The Stumbling Block, I thought I could imagine a further extrapolation of society in which therapy had evolved to a new, maybe higher stage in my fantasy. The stumbling block helps people change. He is there so that ambivalent people can express their ambivalence by interrupting themselves in their habitual activities. Michael Brenson, The Look of the Artist, 2010. My hunch is that most writers, curators, and critics who regularly ask themselves, what am I looking at, don't hear the more reflexive and dissonant question. They don't hear the I as also a you, or the you in the I. I cannot detach what am I looking at from what are you looking at. The latter establishes within me an awareness that even in the moments of intense concentration, I'm a stranger to myself, or rather that there's a stranger in myself, or rather there's a crowd in me, each member of which has had and still seems to want some voice in my perceiving and thinking. What am I looking at gives me the feeling of being welcome to exchange territories in an encounter whose potential cost to me is moderated by a process of reciprocity and transition. What are you looking at asserts the shock and risk, the challenge to process of another experience of looking, one in which I do not know who is holding the cards and whether there is even the possibility of a conversation. The question establishes the existence in me of a vast psychological, sociological, political, and linguistic network. Taken together, these three quotations begin to suggest the kinds of interactions that inhere in our experiences of art, whether as creators, readers, critics, or observers. Each has entered a set of relations in which subjective and objective realities, the self and the material world, seem to engage the possibility of radical morphological change. They seem to suggest that when a given subject finds its form, something is released. My rather prosaic name for this thing is content. Content subverts the easy see-through that imagines we are transparent to each other. Content, the alignment of subject with form, shifts us simultaneously toward the other and away from ourselves, opening the space for the connective tissue of meaning to be made. In his final work, Pure Immanence, Essays on a Life, Deleuze wrote, "But we shouldn't enclose life in the single moment when individual life confronts universal death. A life is everywhere, in all the moments that a given living subject goes through and that are measured by given lived objects. An immanent life carrying with it the events or singularities that are merely actualized in subjects and objects. This indefinite life does not itself have moments, close as they may be to one another, but only between times, between moments. It doesn't just come about or come after, but offers the immensity of an empty time where one sees the event yet to come already happened in the absolute of an immediate consciousness." This evocation of a kind of molecular paradise of incipience, out of which certain objects and subjects precipitate, converting what is potential into the actuality of immediate consciousness, captures some of what I am trying to evoke. The plane of immanence reminds me of Agamben's notion of the moment of arising, which is objective and subjective at the same time, never the emergence of the fact without at the same time being the emergence of the knowing subject itself. I want to attach Agamben's notion of a moment of arising and Deleuze's notion of a plane of immanence to my sense of what it means to allow a work of art to alter the givens of a life. The figure of an alert receptivity, the knowing that we know rather than what we know, informs these abstruse and enigmatic ideas. I want to suggest that works of art might embody both ideas. The moments of eminence that the artist experiences are collapsed into the work to be revived or reimagined by the spectator when she enters its arena. Agamben's moment of arising, the undecidable threshold between object or fact and subject, captures the alteration between subjectivities and historical contingency that the work of art precipitates and fosters and confirms. Perhaps the experience I'm trying to name is simply what animates the conversion of information into knowledge, where what we know is attached to reality through beliefs as well as facts, where affective reasoning informs our choices, decisions, and judgments. You may have noticed that this final term, judgment, has been left out of my talk. It seems evident that we are living in a time of nearly continuous judgment, with little connection to the deliberative preludes entailed in choice and decision. Works of art stop before judgment occurs. They invite us to enlarge our capacity to integrate, absorb, and interpret. They may as well show us how to resist or refrain. In the words of Melville's Bartleby, to prefer not to. Works of art pivot and oscillate, activating our subjective sets, the givens that belong to both maker and recipient, causing them to relax their grip, release their boundaries, finally to risk autonomy in the face of alterity. I want to end by turning to one of my most enduring companions in thought, Emerson, and to his great essay, Experience, from 1843. Where do we find ourselves, he begins. He does not ask, where do I find myself, although the central underlying event of the essay is the death of his young son, Waldo. Emerson begins in a state of paralytic denial, in which he says the loss of his son has had no impact, has changed nothing. I grieve that I cannot grieve, he writes. Emerson begins his essay in what Emily Dickinson called the hour of lead. As he writes, the essay, which I think of as a prose poem, takes on a kind of animation, breathing and exhaling at an almost impossibly slow pace. It meanders and it dwells. The sense of wandering makes it impossible to capture or to paraphrase. I cannot ever recall what it says, even though I have read it dozens of times. The sense one has is that one is undergoing something, of being drawn through a constellation of emerging and disappearing tropes and topics. This attenuated and circuitous journey, this ingathering, pivots for Emerson around the fact of subjective consciousness. It is very unhappy, but too late to be helped, the discovery we have made that we exist. Knowledge that we exist brings forth knowledge that we shall cease to exist. Quote, nothing left us now but death, he writes. Indeed, there is nothing in the material world that is not elusive and slippery. Quote, I take this evanescence and lubricity of all objects which lets them slip through our fingers when we clutch hardest to be the most unhandsome part of our condition. At every turn, we sense the abiding fact of the death of Waldo, and yet slowly, phrase by phrase, the writing begins to alter its web of negative intransigence. It ends, never mind the ridicule, never mind the defeat. Up again, old heart. It seems to say, there is victory yet for all justice, and the true romance which the world exists to realize will be the transformation of genius into practical power. For Emerson, the experience of writing the essay called Experience results in the transformation of genius into practical power. His deadened, inert heart comes back to life. Genius, the given, finds the will to animate the recalcitrant and obdurate into new forms of practical power. The shut world opens out. The given and the chosen greet and touch across the threshold. Thank you.
Do we have time for questions?
Sure. I'm happy, as long as I can have a glass of wine to go with the questions.
I'll get the wine. You guys ask the questions.
I know it's a lot to take in, so it's hard to formulate anything to serve.
Thank you. That was great. Very dense, as you said, very articulate. There's a really cool line towards the end where you talk about art listing harmony in the face of alterity. I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit, that idea. It just really remains true to me. I just wonder if you could elaborate.
So the line is that art asks us to risk autonomy in the face of alterity. So one of the things that I think about why we need art is exactly there, which is that when the stranger comes towards you, you can be protective and defended and scared, right? Because you don't know who that person is. Art is this kind of intersubjective manifestation that makes otherness not fearful, so that you can find yourself leaving your protectiveness and your defensiveness, your autonomy, and moving toward this artifact that is the product of somebody else's subjectivity. So it's this kind of mediated space that frees you from this, the prison, actually, of pure subjectivity. And one of the reasons why I get very upset with people not thinking that art has a tremendous role to play in the human endeavor, is because that idea seems to be so obscured behind all kinds of other ideas, aesthetics and judgments and things. But actually what really happens when you engage is this kind of uncanny, I think it's sort of uncanny, availability of someone else that has made something. You know, it's very delicate, because you don't actually get to be, I don't get to know Zach, but if Zach puts something that Zach's made in front of Anne, then somehow we're meeting somewhere that relaxes this sort of sense that you're you and I'm me and so on. So does that kind of clarify it?
Yeah.
These are the givens. Which do you choose?
No.
Very hard.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've read the essays before, but hearing it this time, there's a moment in the essay where you talk about how you are kind of a digressor and you kind of self-effacingly make claims to shapeliness and the thing. But it seems to me now I'm hearing it that there are three kind of moments of real loss in the piece. The account of your own parents and of the devastation to the Crow nation, to the Crow peoples, and then Emerson's loss of his son. And those seem like really powerful. Those are very powerful moments for me in hearing the talk this time, especially because they seem like moments where you see three different ways of responding, not to something that's given, or in a way, what's given is a really devastating loss. Something's taken away. And those are the givens of those moments.
Right.
And the Crow respond very differently than you becoming a writer or right. So I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about those moments of givenness that are actually traumatic loss, and in particular, your reading of the Crow response. Yeah, because it seemed like you found something that was a choice that they made, and that there's something redemptive in your response to that.
The redemption there, it's a great question. Thank you for it, because I think that simply almost everything I've ever done in terms of my work is against this background of loss, because those two losses of my parents are only two of many. And I've always personally made it my business not to think that that was the important part of my life, or that that's the thing that people should know about me. And I'm I'm rather cruel, I think, in relation to other people's senses that they are victims or things have happened to them and therefore their life is a doomed space and so on. I'm not very patient with that thing because of this notion that those materials are the materials we all have. Sooner or later, everyone loses something. Some earlier, some more traumatically, but we lose. You know, people we love and things we want and so on and so forth. So loss is part of the givens of life for me. And I think that art is one of the ways in which this transformation of that loss can happen. You know, like you can take all of that and you can make something that's different from it. It's not a loss. It's whatever the opposite of loss is. It's like a musical thing, you know, where there are these notes. It's sort of like listening to Bach or something. Like there's this note. For me, it's like a continuum, you know, or a continuo, it's called, right? That sort of note that just goes on and on and on. And for me, that's that note, and it manifests differently in different occasions. So the story of the crow, struck me as a story of abject courage. I want to say something like that. The absolute understanding that to lose one's the things that make the culture, once that is gone, then you lose your sense that you have any bearings, temporality, any eventfulness is possible. So it's tied in my head in a way to the Zimmel quote, you know, where he says, you know, culture is made by the possibility of artifacts that are brought into the behaviors and activities of our lives. And when we begin to make objects that don't do that, that are alien to us and objectify us, that's when we're potentially on the verge of this kind of not noticing. That whole part is about, are we noticing? Or are we so absolutely mesmerized again by this technological thing that we can't actually understand that we're going to, I mean, I have a note on this because of Ray Kurzweil's singularity, you know, and so at the end of it is this idea, I mean, I talked to someone about this yesterday morning, I think, you know, of this, okay, so you have the animal, the human, the machine. So it's a trio. And what seems to be happening is the human is willfully aligning itself with the machine, with technology, out of some slightly misbegotten, I think, idea that we won't have to die, we won't have to lose anything if we go far enough over there. So Kurzweil actually believes that we will very soon have, you know, our iPads will be in our bodies. We will, you know, not have to die. It's a horrendous thought because at that point there is no humanity. Nothing will happen for sure because that will be something else. It will be some other tribe, but it won't be us. So that's interesting to think about in terms of what we're losing or what we're not losing. And then the fear I have about even writing all of that part of it was, you know, I love these things too, and I think they're important. I just think we're not like the crow who understood what had happened to them, that they had been, that the things that they most cared about had been taken away. And so that when I read that in Lear's book, I thought, are we capable of knowing that the things we most care about are being taken away? And do we know how to know that? Or are we so blinded and mesmerized and scared about nowness and futureness that we can't see that, we can't reckon that? And again, art to me is a way of slowing that or pulling back against it or arguing with it. And it's very subtle because so many artists just want to be part of it, you know? Everyone wants to make videos. Everybody wants to be part of that scenario. So, I don't know. I mean, I think we work from all kinds of different energies. And I was very lucky because I seemed to have come into the world with a certain kind of avidity and a certain kind of absolute intense love of being alive. So even though the sorrows have been enormous, I just find this thing incredibly interesting. And my main annoyance is that I'm going to have to die and not be around to, you know, to be. So that's another part of it. You know, pleasure, you know, like pleasure. And then the mistaking of one thing for another. Like so pleasure seems like a very, very important thing for people to be thinking about. Like, what is pleasure? Because I think it keeps getting defined for us. But I think pleasure is very particular to creatures. Very, very particular. Peeing is pleasurable. I'm sorry, it just is. You know, you're sort of like, this is heaven. Do you know what I mean? It's very creaturely. Or sleeping or eating, you know, these things we do. Children, speak. I didn't mean that. I take it back. You're not children. You're grown-ups.
Well, we have time for a reception, and
yes,
you can ask questions
in less exposed way.